thought I'd continue reading a little bit more out of Eyes of Horus. It is a far memory book by Joan Marshal Grants. She was a seer, and this is a reincarnation of hers, which plays about 3,500 years BC. And she is Ra-up in this book, in this memory, the son of a priestess of Ra, and an heir. He grows up with his sister, who is not from the same mother, I believe, and you will hear about her, and I've just simply forgotten her name there. Kia. We are now in chapter 5, the ASIATICS. By the time Kias was 9, she could beguile people even when they tried to be cross with her. She had always been able to be much naughtier than me before Niam got angry. And even then, there had been a kind of pride in Niam's anger, like Hanuk felt when the leopard cub he was trying to tame bit his aunt, the one whom he'd never liked in the ankle. I wanted to have a leopard cub too, and I think father would have let me if Niam hadn't told him it might hurt Kias. When he said I couldn't have the cub and I knew the reason, I was quite cross with Kias for 2 days, which was unfair because it wasn't her food and she had wanted it more than I had, and I'd even made Hanuk promise to catch one for me. In fact, the cub would really have been hers, but she said it must be called mine, as there was a better chance of my being allowed to keep it. That's one of the good things about being a boy, she said. People think you're clever about looking after yourself, and they let you do the things that grown-ups call dangerous without making so much fuss. Well, boys are cleverer, I said firmly. I was always trying to be firm with Kias, and made her realize that she was nearly 2 years younger than me, but I never had much success. Nonsense. It's more difficult for me to get my own way than it is for you. You are allowed to do more, but I have to do things without being allowed. What about the day we both got lost? If I hadn't thought of making up that useful story, we might have both been scolded, even by father, and perhaps made to go to bed early for 3 days or 4 days. I didn't like being reminded about that day, and ever since had felt rather uncomfortable when I thought about it. Kias and I had decided to play at being an army sent against the ASIATICS. I lent her one of my bows. She could use it quite well because I taught her privately. We took food and my hunting knife and 2 of the hunting dogs in their double leash. We tied parcels on their backs so they could be the pack animals, but they didn't like it much, so we soon let them go home. Everybody except us were ASIATICS, which made it a very exciting game, and we had to crawl on our hands and knees a lot of the time to keep from being seen. The big water channel beyond the vineyard was the narrow sea, and the marsh was the great lake. On the way, we saw one of the gardeners, the only one we didn't like, squatting down to weed the lettuces. He was a fat man, and his behind looked very large and round. Just as I noticed it, Kias nudged me and whispered, "You needn't think he is a gardener." Sorry. "He really is the king of the ASIATICS come to spy on us." ASIATICS are covered with scales under their clothes, and the only way to kill things that are covered with scales is to find their soft place. Sorry. With crocodiles, it's their tummies. And with the ASIATICS, it's their bottoms. Go on, Rab. See if you can shoot him. He'd never find us if we hide in the bean field, and we could stalk him from there. No, Kias, we mustn't. I tried to pull her away, but she stood firm, notching an arrow carefully to her bowstring. Poor Rab, he's frightened, she said, as if to an imaginary companion. He's frightened because when he set out to fight the ASIATICS, he found one right in his own garden. He's too frightened to kill it, but I am not frightened. I only suggested he should have the first shot because he is still a little better at arrows than I am. If he's too frightened to shoot ASIATICS, it won't be long before he's too frightened to shoot anything. I expected if he had to kill even a very small hippo, he'd run all the way home to Niam and say that the hippo was chasing him. The very last time that Kias had dared me, I'd promised myself not to be taken in again. But almost before I knew what was happening, I saw the ASIATICS, the gardener, jump up with a roar. And then I realized it was my arrow that had hit him. Sorry. Kias plucked at my kilt and whispered urgently, "Don't stand there, Rab. You've killed one of the enemy. Now we must go and find some more of them." We crept away between 2 rows of beans, and after we'd gone what Kia thought was a safe distance, I parted the stalks and looked back. The gardener was going on with his work. We listened and could hear him muttering to himself. He had stuck the arrow through his belt, so I knew he had recognized it as one of ours. They had blunt tips, and he would probably betray us to Niam, and she'd tell father. We were out of the beans now, on the edge of a cornfield. We crouched down in an irrigation ditch, which ran between the 2 fields, and as there was no one in sight, we no longer had to whisper. "What are you looking gloomy about?" asked Kias. "I'm wondering if Niam is bound to tell father about us shooting the gardener. Or if you'll be able to persuade her not to. I don't suppose you really have a chance to try, because she'll have told him before we get home. Us shooting gardeners is one of the sort of things he really minds about." Why will you always spoil things by wondering what's going to happen afterwards? It's like not eating too much honey in case you get a pain. But if you did think of the pain, you wouldn't eat too much honey, and then you wouldn't have one. This was a reference to what had happened to Kias a few days before. She never got cross at being reminded of things like that. "What you don't understand, Rab, is that I like eating the honey. That's why I ate such a lot of it, because I liked it. And I always remember that, though I forgot the pain as soon as I'd finished having it. If I'd been like you, I wouldn't have eaten too much, and I wouldn't have had the pain, but then I wouldn't have had anything nice to remember. I think the most important thing to do with a day is to fill it as full as possible with nice things to remember." I sighed. "I know you do, Kias. It's a pity, though, that your kind of nice things do seem to lead us into troubles almost always. You'll be glad of me one day, Rab. When you're very old and your legs have gone wobbly and you can't go looking for any more adventures, you'll be able to sit in the sun or in the shade if it's too hot and smile to yourself about all the interesting things you did when you were young. Even when you're very old, so old that your children are beginning to worry in case the wall paintings of your tomb get too faded before they can shut you up in it. I'll only have to say to you, of course I'll be very old too by then, do you remember how your arrow hit the gardener's bottom when he was being an Asiatic among the lettuces? And you'll smile, quite probably you'll laugh, and you'll be thinking of bean fields instead of bitumen. It is bitumen they do mummies with, isn't it? Kias, you know people aren't made into mummies in the HORUS. Yes, but they do everywhere else in Egypt, and before I die I'm going to ask people to do me too. Then in hundreds and hundreds of years somebody may unwrap me to see what the people of our time look like. I shall look as thin and much more beautiful even than I do now, and the man who unwraps me will be young. I think he can have hair the same colour as father's, and he will have a very rich fat wife, who he has always hated living with without realizing it. Then when he sees me looking so young and beautiful, he'll know how horrid his wife is, and he'll wrap me up again very carefully so I shan't get spoiled and go away and live all by himself and think about me. And he'll be happy when he's thinking like I am." She sighed contentedly. "It will be very splendid to have someone fall in love with you after you've been dead 1,000 years. Thinking of her being turned into a mummy made me feel cold down my back. I thought she had done it on purpose, so I said dampingly, "A moment ago you were laughing at the gardener's bottom when we were both about 80 years old. You'll have to make up your mind which of those 2 stories you like best, because if you're going to grow very, very old so that we can enjoy remembering what fun we had as children, if anyone ever does unwrap your mummy, even if he's a handsome young man and not a dull old scribe, he'd take one look at you and go home and tell his wife how beautiful she is, even if he had noticed that very morning that she was getting fat." Kias was not at all disconcerted. "Poor Ra-Up, the trouble with you is that you haven't learned yet how to imagine 4 things at once, all opposites, and believe in them at the same time. It must be so dull for you, worse than if we had to eat the same thing every day." Then, before I could answer, she pulled me down into the bottom of the ditch. It was much muddier than it looked. There's a whole army of Asiatics coming this way. Very fierce ones with curly beards. You can look now, but take care they don't see you. A group of women carrying baskets and sickles were coming along the path leading to the cornfield. Look, she whispered excitedly. They're coming to cut off the heads of the Egyptians. We must go and collect more of our army. We'll need about 100. Then we shall only be outnumbered 10 to 1. That's about fair between Egyptians and Asiatics, but enough on our side to make sure of us winning. We crawled the whole length of the irrigation ditch, and by the time we reached the end of it, Chios was mostly covered with thick black mud. It had even matted her hair. When I told her what she looked like, she said she couldn't look any muddier than I did because there wasn't enough mud in the Nome. She agreed that mud was one of the things that Niam really did mind about and that we'd better go and wash it off before somewhere. We couldn't go to our bathing pool because someone would be sure to notice us and tell Niam. Before now, we'd washed in one of the shallow pits made of baked brick where the cattle drank, but there was no way of getting to one without being seen, and Chios wouldn't stop believing in Asiatics. So we decided to go down to the river. It was a long way, and for us to go there alone was very forbidden. Even if anybody sees us, they won't recognize us, said Chios comfortingly. I don't think even Niam would unless she was quite close. I decided that as Niam was bound to be very cross if she saw us like this, it was worth risking an extra crossness that would come from us being caught beyond the places where we were allowed to go alone. The reeds were very high. It was just before they were due to be cut, and there wasn't a proper path through them, only a narrow track where gazelles and small animals went down to drink. I thought I saw leopard spoor, but was not sure, so I didn't tell Chios. We came out of the reeds where the river made a kind of little bay, and the bank shelved steeply enough for us to swim without having to go far out. I kept a good watch for crocodiles, but didn't see any, and there were none of their tracks in the mud. We got ourselves fairly clean, though our clothes still looked very dirty, even after we had washed and dried them in the sun. The pleats had come out of the kilns, and they looked rather queer. We didn't realize how late it was until the sun was very low. Then we thought we should get home quicker if, instead of taking the path we had come by, we went back along the river and found another way through the reeds. But the reeds went on much further than I thought they did, and we couldn't find another track through them. I began to wonder if the spoor really hadn't been a leopard, and almost at the same moment Chios said in a firm, brisk voice, like Niam uses when she says it's time for bed, I won't think of crocodiles, I won't think of crocodiles, I can't think of crocodiles even if I try to. I tried to reassure her. There aren't any crocodiles here. Where they live is a long way off. I know it is, said Kia, but her voice didn't sound quite so firm. Of course I know it is. If there were crocodiles here, I should have to think about them. Still, I do wish this was a dream with antelopes in it. If it was a dream, you'd forgot about it in the morning, and this will be awfully exciting to remember when we've got home. Now it was quite dark. We could see a little way right down by the river, but it was no use trying to push our way through the reeds. Kia's hands and mine was cold, and I felt her shiver. She knew I had, and said, if it wasn't a frightening kind of shiver, only the cold kind. I had begun to think how nice it would be to hear Niam scolding us when Kia said, I wonder if they have started to look for us yet. I suppose they wouldn't think of looking down here, or do you think they will, just because it is so specially not allowed? I rather hope the gardener has taken the arrow to father, then perhaps he'll know this is one of our days for doing specially not allowed things, and then he might look for you first. The stars were very bright, though. The moon was too young to be much help. The bank shelved unexpectedly. I stumbled and hit my shin on a stone. It didn't feel like a deep cut, but I could feel the blood. Somebody's banging. I could feel the blood running down, and it was too dark to see it. Suddenly we saw a light a little way ahead of us, like a torch reflected in the water. We ran forward shouting. It was a man holding a torch with a fish spear in his other hand. He said he'd been after eels in the shallows. We both knew him, though not very well, but when we told him who we were, he didn't believe us until he had whirled the torch around his head to make a better light in which to see us. He walked ahead of us to show the way. I whispered to Chios, It's rather shaming end to an adventure, having to be taken home. No, it isn't, she answered comfortably. Not if you've captured one of the enemy and made him guide you by the secret way into their stronghold, especially if you've killed as many Asiatics as we have. Poor things. I'm quite sorry for them. We've left so few of them alive. Niam was so worried about us that she was in tears when we got back. At least she was sniffing as though she had been crying. The fisherman had left us outside the entrance to the courtyard. I'd asked him to come in, but he said he wanted to get back to his eels, so Niam thought we had found our own way home. She was so relieved to see us that she forgot to ask exactly where we'd been. Kias put on her special look, which she kept for occasions like this. It made her seem very small and pathetic, while she told Niam we had both got so tired playing that we had fallen asleep, and when we woke up it was all dark. And then poor Raab fell and cut his leg, and he has been so brave about it. I made a face at her behind Niam's back, but she went on. And Raab was so good at looking after me. He held my hand all the way home, and it didn't let me get frightened at all. Dear Niam, it's so nice to be home again. She put her arms round Niam's neck and hugged her, which flattered her so much that she forgot to scold us, and only made small disapproving noises at the state of our clothes. Kias explained the mud by saying we had fallen into an irrigation ditch in the dark. On our way to bed, I said to Kias, Niam can't have known about the arrow, or even you wouldn't have been able to get round her so easily. Kias agreed, and admitted that perhaps the gardener wasn't an Asiatic after all. When I went in to say good night to her, she said sheepily, It has been a lovely day, hasn't it, Raab? And wasn't I right in not worrying about unpleasantness, which never even happened? Yes, I suppose you were, I said rather grudgingly. But you mightn't have been. It was lucky for us that Father has gone to Roydon's house, for you wouldn't have taken him in like you did Niam. If he asked where we'd been, we would have had to tell him. I wish Father had been here. I got such a lovely story to tell him. I made it up all the way home. What story? Oh, a story to explain why I'd been down by the river. I knew we'd have to tell him where we'd been. It was about how we'd seen a poor little hare in the corn that had hurt one of its paws. It was its right front paw. We wanted to bring it home and make it well again, but it made for the river, and of course we had to follow it. We wouldn't leave the poor little thing to be eaten by something it couldn't run away from. But it went on, and several times we almost caught it. And then it got suddenly dark, and of course we were rather lost. Nobody would be cross with us for trying to help a poor little hurt hare. Yes, you mustn't tell lies like that, especially to Father. Well, I told him about antelopes, and he thought I had made it up. So why shouldn't I make up a hare that he would believe in, just to make it fair? Anyway, I think it would be a very kind thing to do. He'd be happier thinking what kind of children he'd got. And we'd be happier thinking what nice believing father we've got. And if I give him practice in believing things I tell him, he'll soon be able to believe in real things like antelopes. She yawned. And I like making people happy, said Kias. She made me laugh. Have a good day.